everybody, and welcome to this month's edition of the Monthly Blend. Today we are going to be talking about Baltimore, and we have three awesome guests who are very active in the Baltimore region. We're going to talk about how the Baltimore region and the DMV regions are merging together and doing things together. My name is Tien Wong. I'm a co-host. I'm the CEO of Opus 8. We help companies raise capital, and we invest in early stage marketing technology, health tech companies, and fintech companies. My co-host, Anthony Millen, is a venture partner at Urban Ust. He's an attorney and he is a serial entrepreneur. And together we sort of created this podcast to highlight the benefits of the region, the things that are going really well, the assets and things that are working, and also to identify areas where we can all improve. So thank you for tuning in. I would like to have our three guests, Chris College, Deb Tillett, and David Warshawski, all introduce yourselves, and then we'll turn it over to Anthony. But Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Tien. It's great to be with you. So I'm Chris College. I'm the managing partner for TCP Venture Capital. We manage a couple different venture funds, but the one that's most well known in the region is the Propel Baltimore Fund.
Thank you, Chris. Deb?
Hi, I'm Deb Tillett, and I am the president of ETC, which is the City of Baltimore's Technology and Innovation Center. And I consider it my mission. We work with every stage of startups, but I consider it my mission to make an economic impact on the City of Baltimore, one entrepreneur at a time.
Terrific. Deb, do you want to talk a little bit about your adventures recently with the Innovation Week?
Oh, sure. So we most recently took over Baltimore Innovation Week from the folks at Technically. And in years past, it was a way to really showcase the city of Baltimore and all of the innovation that is thriving here. And also we made sure that we highlighted the different areas and neighborhoods in the city. So we would do a different track day on the east side and something happening over on the west side, and made sure that we highlighted each of the amazing neighborhoods here in the city. But we had to do it virtually this year. So we did 3 days, pretty long days. We had 44 sessions over the course of 3 days, and panel discussions. And again, really highlighting and focusing on the innovation that is happening here in the city. And it's amazing. And yeah. I, of course, hosted the Yappy Hour, Meow Hour, so we could highlight our fur babies during this pandemic time.
That sounds like a lot of fun, and congrats on a great week.
Thank you.
David, welcome.
Nice to see you, Tien. So I wear two different hats. The first is I own a marketing communications agency that's been very involved in the VC and early stage world, but the main hat that I'm wearing today is I'm the founder and owner of W Ventures, which is a very unusual bird in the VC community. We write checks just like a normal VC would write, but with our sister marketing communications agency, we'll do the marketing communications work for any of the companies in our portfolio in exchange for equity. We also run an accelerator, and we own the house next door to the accelerator, which we call the Founders House, where founders of any company that we invest in can stay there.
Sounds awesome. Well, thank you guys for sharing your time with us today. We are thrilled to have this conversation. And with that, let me turn it over to my co-host, Anthony Millen. Anthony.
Great. Thank you, Tien, and thank you, David and Chris and Deb, for joining us today. So where we'd like to start today is to just give the audience a chance to understand how things have evolved in the Baltimore startup ecosystem. So we'd love to just hear your thoughts on how you would describe the ecosystem in Baltimore today versus just say 5 years ago, and how it's grown and changed on both a macro level, and then specifically touching also on what changes came about as a result of COVID. COVID's had so much of an impact across so many parts of life and ecosystems. So with that, maybe Deb, I'll ask you if you could start off.
Sure. Well, I have a unique perspective on this because there was a time back in the late 90s where I went back and forth between here and DC. So I had a startup that we did in DC, but I lived here. And so I would commute to DC for this startup. And it was really interesting to see the differences in the tech startup community in DC versus here. So then I decided, well, it's a good excuse to sort of leave the husband I didn't like. So I got an apartment in DC and I went down there, you know. So then I moved to DC and I bought a condo when it was the right time to buy a condo. And then that startup we sold. And so I cashed out. And the other startup that I could get into was back here in Baltimore. So then I did the reverse commute and I came back to Baltimore. So I've had a foot in both, but I've actually seen the ecosystem really thrive in the 2000s to where we are now. And ETC played a huge part in that. And we were one of the first movers. But now there are so many, David, you're one good example, but there are so many accelerators and there's so many other places and spaces in the Baltimore area that are working with startups and technology. And Chris, you see them all the time.
I definitely do. Definitely do. I would agree with Deb that there's been more activity probably in the last 5 years before the pandemic than there was the previous 5 years before that. And we've been around since 2012 in investing in early stage technology companies that entire time. And I think what you'd see is, as Deb described, in Baltimore before the pandemic, we had 3 new venture capital firms actually start up, raise north of $25 million. And then we also saw at least another, I'd say 7 to 8, and Deb probably keeps track of it accurately, incubators that started up around the Baltimore area. So one of the things that I've seen is just much more velocity of organizations, partnerships, and more capital in Baltimore than we've ever had before. Now, I would caution, though, that with the pandemic, things did slow down and things became all remote. And I think that hurts that ability to work with people tightly, and that hurts the ability for startups to grow quickly. But post-pandemic, I'm very hopeful that a lot of those organizations can start to work with each other. And I think that's one of the key things that I would say we need to really focus on in Baltimore is that once the pandemic's kind of moved through and we're doing in-person meetings, we need to do more things with Delmarva because we have kind of spread out a little bit in terms of more incubators around the state, around the area, and also more venture capital firms spread out a little bit more.
I think the collaboration is what's missing because startups and early stage companies really benefit from that water cooler conversation. What can happen over, pouring your cup of coffee or getting your coffee out of the Keurig. I always, funny, but used to say that there were 3 C's that were really important for startups: creativity, capital, and connections. And I added 2 more, which of course is coffee in the morning and craft beer at night. So those 5 things are really what's critical to, startups. They get to, have that aha moment. So that's really missing in the pandemic.
I can't reinforce that enough. We have 18 portfolio companies all living within Baltimore City. And prior to the pandemic, all of those CEOs would be able to really see each other in person. They'd be able to get feedback, information, thoughts. They do it on Zoom, but it's just not the same and it's not as efficient.
I didn't mean to jump in, and David, we'll give you a chance to talk. But during Baltimore Innovation Week, I was the panel moderator for 3 deans from area universities. And we were talking about that. What do we do? What's happening in the pandemic? And again, I had this aha moment and I thought, we really need to be making these students take acting classes because they need to know how to be on screen, right? How would you do that except in an acting class? How do you get that emotion across? How do you appeal to people when all you are is on a screen? Take an acting class.
you both have more experience going back further than I do, but I do have to say one of the main reasons we started W Ventures is because I travel a lot for business. And I was very frustrated over the past 10, 15 years hearing that Baltimore is not a great place to start a company. You can't get the funding in Baltimore. The ecosystem or entrepreneurial ecosystem doesn't exist here. And I think today that's totally different. There's a tremendous amount of excitement. There's so much happening and a lot to be proud of in Baltimore. We have, whether it's the great entrepreneurial ecosystem, a lot of wonderful founders, more people who are funding. We have tech stars coming here. We have Upsurge coming here. We have great institutions like Maryland Momentum Fund, Propel Baltimore, TEDCO. There's really a growing infrastructure here that I think people can be proud of. And what I've always told people, and I really believe this is true from having traveled a lot, is that if you're going to start up a company and your aim is at some point to be highly successful and hopefully be an international business, if you're in the US, you want to be on the East Coast. If you're going to be on the East Coast, you want to be in Baltimore because it's probably, from a transportation standpoint, one of the best infrastructure places to be. Lowest cost of living of any of the major cities in Baltimore, highest trained and skilled workforce and the most diverse workforce, and a ton of colleges and universities. So if there's any place that should be the Silicon Valley of the East, it should be Baltimore, in my opinion. And I think that's what Deb, Chris, and I are all really proponents of and hoping to help create. And I'll share just to that very end, one of the thesis of W Ventures is we will only invest in companies that are based in this region and are willing to commit to staying in this region. Or if they're outside of the region, they have 3 years to move to the Baltimore, Washington area in order to found their headquarters here. Or in a case of a recent deal we did, they'll have a co-headquarters in Baltimore within, now they've got 2.5 years.
Well, the amazing part of Baltimore, and I tell people this all the time, is it is Smaltimore. You are 1 degree of separation from anybody you need to know. But I can trace my career 1 degree of separation from Kermit the Frog to Mick Jagger, Sid Meier, and Bedouin tribesmen. And I have had all of those opportunities as a result of being in Baltimore.
In terms, though, you've listed a lot of the strengths of Baltimore. As you kind of look forward if you look forward 5 years, what are some ideas and steps you think we could be taking and can be taken by people who are leaders in the ecosystem, let's just say over the next year or two, to take Baltimore to the next level in terms of some of the challenges that could be overcome? As you look forward now from a vision point of view, what would be some of those steps that you could take now to drive things even further forward?
I would argue that a lot of it is beginning to happen. We're just at the sort of, no pun intended, the seed stage of where things are, like Upsurge Baltimore starting here, where we just had a call last week where all of the VCs, all of the funders are getting together to talk about infrastructure and how we can better communicate and help facilitate deal sharing between us. I think that kind of work is crucial. Techstars coming here, the accelerators that exist here, it's beginning to boil. That doesn't mean that there isn't more work to do and we shouldn't be focused on it. But I think one of the best things that people like Deb, Chris, and I can do is to constantly be talking to entrepreneurs, to be mentoring them. And one of the things I'm a big proponent of, I'm tired of the VC seeing a reasonably good deck and not responding or saying, not for me. Today, especially in the Baltimore region, I make an effort, if it's a reasonably good deck, to say, this isn't for us, but let me introduce you over here to somebody else. Or, hey, you have a great foundational idea, but it needs some work. Here are people who can help you. And I think the more that we are interconnected, and I can refer people to Chris or to Deb or to other folks to make Baltimore vibrant, that's where the next step needs to be.
I think the thing that helps, I didn't mean to cut you off, Chris, the thing that helps is when the successful entrepreneurs who potentially cash out decide to stay and reinvest their time and their effort in the ecosystem. And we have two amazing examples of that. Guy Filippelli with Squadra Ventures and Paul Palmieri with Grit. It's his venture fund. And, you know, they are successful. They were successful in their own businesses that started right here. And they are committed. They are committed and they're here. And they're reinvesting time, effort, and money in the startup ecosystem.
Yeah, I think Deb hit on something that's really important, and that is that when you see founders that do sell their businesses, be able to create a lot of wealth for their employees and their upper management, there's two kinds of founders. There's the one that flies to Florida and moves to Florida and lives in Florida on the beach the rest of their life. And then there's the other kind that jumps back in and helps seed some of their employees from the previous venture into new businesses. And I think you see that not only in Red Owl Analytics, which was actually our first investment out of the Propel Baltimore Fund 1, way back guy, but you see that also in advertising.com and Millennial Media and Videology and a whole host of companies that Paul Palmieri and Steve Root and Chris Brandenburg were involved in. And as Deb said, all three of those founders, you know, they started something else. They didn't go to the beach. To answer the other question, I think one of the issues that I would see, Anthony, is that we do need to do what David said, which is more collaboration. We have a lot more resources than ever before in terms of capital, in terms of organizations, incubators, accelerators, support by organizations like Deb at ETC. But we also have a lot of sprawl, maybe urban sprawl, I would call it, where a lot of these resources are a little farther away from where they used to be, 5 or 10 years ago, where it was all in one area. So I think collaboration and working together, and I think, as David said, Upsurge is trying to fill that void of collaboration, is going to be the key to success in the Baltimore, Washington region over the next 5 years or so.
And it goes without saying in many, urban areas and cities that infrastructure and crime are an issue that needs to be dealt with. People, goes without saying.
Adding on to that, the concept of what does Baltimore, Washington, and the region, Delmarva, have to offer that David hit on, was one of the things that every early stage technology company is always looking for: software engineers. And I think people forget that because of Fort Meade, because of the federal government, because of the state government, we have a high concentration of software engineers, and I would say middle experienced software engineers, not just right out of college. That's probably one of the real selling points for Baltimore, for Delmarva, because you don't even see that in Silicon Valley or in New York or in Austin. It's much harder to get a software engineer for an early stage tech company in those markets than it is in the Delmarva, especially the Baltimore market.
Well, I was in computer gaming for over 20 years, and in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. And, Hunt Valley, believe it or not, was at one point the third largest gaming cluster in the country. Mm-hmm. We had that many from one game company, Microprose, Sid Meier and Bill Staley. All the others spun out and they stayed in the Hunt Valley area because there was talent, because they could find good talent. And that's critical. You hit it, Chris, with the tech talent.
Chris, you also started talking about the overall region. The last area I just would like to have you guys touch on, and part of the monthly blend vision is around, and you've talked a lot today about collaboration within Baltimore, but also looking at kind of collaboration across this regional area. And so I'd love to just hear how you feel Baltimore kind of fits in and and your thoughts on more of it, just ideas for the region itself, and how we can see more collaboration and tying into the different relative strengths that different parts of our region have in a stronger way.
I'd say that one of the things that falls to people like us on this call is I'm spending a lot of time both traveling to DC, meeting with angels, meeting with VC investors, creating the relationships, sharing decks back and forth, getting opinions from those folks. And that helps to really solidify this area. We have people from DC and Virginia looking at investing in some of our deals. That's where it has to start. And until more people make that trip south and spend some time talking with folks in the DC and Virginia area, I don't think anything of substance will happen. But I do see, and one of the interesting things that I felt happened during COVID is that location of funding became far less important because everybody was on Zoom. So used to be, if you were a New York company, you raised money in New York. If you were a Baltimore company, you raised money in Baltimore. But all of a sudden, especially DC is looking at Baltimore and saying, well, it's right around the corner, and I can hop on a Zoom with them, and they have a really interesting idea. And by the way, I am blown away recently in the last 6 months of the concepts and business ideas that are coming out of Baltimore Plain. It's like nothing that I've experienced in the last, 10 years or so. It's really whoosh, taking off, where you're seeing a lot of really interesting early stage companies. And I think the more we can highlight that, share it with the DC region, get funding from there to get involved in Baltimore, the quicker that relationship grows.
I would agree with David. I guess the one thing I would add is that prior to the pandemic, we always wanted to do everything in person, and being able to use Zoom like we are today, I think makes meetings with a lot of our peers and colleagues and potential investments around the region much more efficient. So we work actively with our portfolio companies after we invest in them. And because they're all in Baltimore, it's really easy to get 2 or 3 meetings done in a day. Well, prior to the pandemic, I would try to go see 2 or 3 companies in a day in the Delmarva area. And with traffic, you couldn't do that. So I think it's really opened up the ability to get that first meeting much more efficient. Now, there's still, at least in our firm, there's still a belief that we have to meet founders. We have to spend time with them. We have to understand if they want to work with us and it's a good fit. But you can be much more efficient now, getting a lot more meetings done, and then doing the in-person meeting or the breakfast or lunch right after you've done that. And, our objective lens is the entire kind of mid-Atlantic here. So we spend a lot of time in Philly and Pittsburgh and Richmond and even as far up as New York. And I think Zoom will actually help us collaborate more effectively with all of the people in the Delmarva area.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That kind of brings us to the end of the first segment of what we're focusing on today. And now I'd like to hand it back to Tien.
Thanks, Anthony. And thank you guys for those awesome responses and back and forth. So I have a question. We're blessed here in Baltimore as well as in the DC region with a diverse, as David mentioned, a diverse and highly motivated and excellent workforce, right? It's probably arguably one of the best in the country, arguably one of the most diverse. And especially when you compare it with the other tech hubs around the country. But, we want to look at things on an absolute basis. So we want to improve what we're doing with supporting female entrepreneurs, supporting entrepreneurs of color and veterans. And what are you guys, as you guys go about doing this, right, and actively supporting diversity and inclusion? And I really do applaud all of you for doing this. This is fantastic. But for our audience, what challenges are you facing? What kind of barriers are there? And is it really difficult? And how do you conduct your outreach to these pockets of, historically underrepresented entrepreneurs?
That's a great question.
Maybe I can start with that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I happen to be part of, and it's timely, a 2:00 meeting today with Forward Cities eShip, which is a Kauffman Foundation organization. We've been meeting for over a year, and they're really, really focused on Baltimore being the city for Black and brown entrepreneurs, and supporting small businesses. So we've been meeting on a regular basis. They very much have again, forward-thinking view of how to make this happen and how we can. Many times, I think that underserved population, sometimes, you can't knock on the door if you don't know where the door is. And so making sure that we are out there and we're organizing a in the neighborhood walking tour and talking tour to make sure that people know where the resources are if you're an entrepreneur. One good statistic for us is that our Accelerate Baltimore this past year, 2020, while it was all virtual, it was 5 all minority and women owned companies, all 5 in the cohort. And, I try and play an active role in looking at that population to make sure that they are getting represented.
I would make the argument that when practiced the right way, VC investing is colorblind, because you look for the best team, the best idea, the best execution. And when you do that, you end up by nature with an incredible diversity of talent. In our portfolio, the majority of our investments are in people of color. We have investments in women-owned business and veteran-owned business, not specifically because we went looking for them, but rather we're open to hearing from them and judge them based solely on the merits of, is this something that we believe has the potential to really grow under this leadership? So I would say we all need to do a better job of making sure that, as Deb said, we're knocking on some doors, but I haven't seen in the Baltimore community a lack of underrepresented startup founders not being able to find people like me. In fact, I get a ton of decks from people of color, from women, from veterans, et cetera. So I don't know that we're hurting. Can we do a better job? I think the answer is yes. But I will say, and this is not a Baltimore issue, this is a universal United States issue, until we address education, until education is at a higher level for all communities, and especially financial and business literacy education is improved, this is going to be a long-term struggle, no matter, what sex, what color, what race you are. The other part is we have to have access, reasonable access for every community to the internet, because even if you have the education, but you don't have the access to the internet, it's very hard to compete in today's world. So there's some structural things that I don't think the VC community itself can fix that need to happen in order to empower people like Deb, Chris, and me to be even better at what we're doing.
Well, being a marketing professional, maybe it speaks to your skills that you're able to fill the top of your funnel with great opportunities. And it would be great to see other, venture capitalists from New York, Boston, and elsewhere, California, sort of improve their marketing. But it's so interesting that organically you have actually a diverse portfolio, just because based on merits. And it really plays to the theory, and I think it's being proven out by data as we collect it, that diverse portfolios are the best portfolios for returns to LPs. So, Chris, what are your thoughts on this?
I agree with Deb and David. I think David explained, how we like to try to look at companies when we're investing in them as well. We have done one other thing that I think is important in the last 4 years, and that is we've started to track it. So we have self-reporting. Of our CEOs, we have 4 female CEOs. The workforce is now 35% women versus, just 5 years ago, that was more like 20% in our industry. One of the other things I think that you can do is you can put in place different programs and organizations. One of our portfolio companies, Pro Tennis, started up an effort called Baltimore Tracks, which is a consortium of most of our portfolio companies and then other early stage tech companies in the Baltimore area. And what they do is whenever they get a resume from a minority or an underrepresented group, if it's not a good resume for their needs at that time, they make sure that resume gets to the other 20 different early stage tech companies that are looking for talent. And that's how you do it. You try to make that extra effort to try to be inclusive, try to make the extra effort to put people in the right places. You can't change your business or hire the wrong person, but you can open up opportunities by creating programs like Nick Culberson did at Pro Tennis called Baltimore Tracks.
I'll add, and I'm curious, Chris and Deb, if you're seeing this as well. I feel like I'm seeing it on both sides. I'm seeing far more young women getting into VC than I've ever seen. I find myself on Zooms and in meetings with often it's a preponderance of women in the meeting as opposed to the traditional guys. And the same with people of color. It's beginning to change. So I don't want us to poo-poo everything, because I do feel like both on the VC side, you're seeing change, and also from the early stage companies, I haven't seen, an overwhelming, it's only this group that we're getting decks from. It's across the board. And to me, that's a wonderful problem for us to have. Again, can we all do better and can we grow from here? 100%. But I don't want us to also think that there aren't some good things already in the works, and those young women in VC firms will become the head of VC firms in the future. And that's the direction we need to go.
Yeah, I've seen a lot change over the years. Given my age and being in the tech world since the 80s, when I went to work at the first game company, there were 100 plus employees and there were only 10 women. And I was the highest ranking of them. And just thinking through that is crazy how many more women we see in the business these days, and especially in tech.
This is great. Well, congrats on the diversity of your activities. It's fantastic. And I think you're setting a great example for a lot of other ecosystem builders and investors out there. Sort of as a wrap question, do you guys have any specific needs, asks, or wants? We have a lot of viewers from the region. They want to contribute in some way, voluntary or other. In terms of opportunities that you might have that they can help achieve some of your objectives or gaps that you might have. Chris, you're in the venture capital field. What types of things?
That's a really easy one. So all you entrepreneurs out there that have a great business idea, please go to our website and send us an email and tell us about that idea and that opportunity. We love getting involved, and we probably see 400 to 500 opportunities a year. We only make 4 or 5 investments, but we get those other organizations connected to other VCs. We get them connected to other resources like Deb or Tedco or David. Reach out to us. We'll be glad to try to help fund you. And if we can't fund you, we'll try to get you in the right place.
Thank you, Chris. And what is your website, Chris? It
is TCP, Tom Charlie Paul .vc. Nice.
Awesome. Very simple. Thank you so much. David, how about you guys?
I have 2 asks. The first is, yes, Baltimore has issues with crime, but so does New York and so does LA. We're no different than those metropolitan areas. Stop poo-pooing Baltimore. Start talking about all of the wonderful things. Be bullish about Baltimore. We have tremendous reasons and assets to be bullish about, and we only undermine ourselves when we talk about the negatives. Every place that has a major startup ecosystem has its problems, but please, let's be bullish and go out there and talk about the merits of Baltimore. The second is, I'm going to say, when you send Chris the deck, sometimes I'll end up seeing it, or if I see it, I'll end up with Chris, but please send us decks. And I think the other thing that we can do is exactly where Chris went, which is the more we can connect people and give feedback on decks, doesn't have to be long, but just to say, here's why it's not a fit for us, and here's who you should talk to, or I see some issues that are going to come up if you pursue this line of thinking. That, I think, is the more people can do that and offer that, the better this area will be from an entrepreneurial ecosystem side.
That's great, David. And what is your website so people can get in touch with you?
Sure. It's wventuresllc.com.
Thank you so much. And Deb, you have the final word.
Oh my, David, you're absolutely right. I think, and I have been saying this forever, that Baltimore needs a chief marketing officer. They need someone who is dedicated to telling the good story that Baltimore is. And you're absolutely right. Yes, there's crime, but all major cities have crime. But affordable, livable, waterfront city, Baltimore is amazing. So if we could just get that word out there correctly. And so you should be the chief marketing officer, David.
And then Deb, in terms of
too many hats already, Deb. I'm gonna defer.
He's probably
I agree with you. We need that cohesive story being told. And I think a lot of that begins with people who are out in the world, in the business world, being positive about Baltimore and realizing, I mean, truly from the assets we have, I don't know any other place that competes as well as we do on the East Coast. And we need to be proud of that. And we need to be talking about that as opposed to be talking about the crime issues or where homicide was filmed. Those aren't the topics we need to be discussing.
But you know, the building that ETC is housed in, we moved in 2013, and you know, the landlord has done an amazing job with where we are. There's a brewery, there's a restaurant. It's incredible. And I tell people that before we moved in here in 2013, this building was last seen in 2003, season 2, episode 7 of The Wire, right? It was just absolutely falling apart. And it is now this amazing place and space. And that's the story we need to be telling.
Absolutely. And Deb, you know, ETC's got your fingers in so many pies. Obviously, the most recent success was last week with the Innovation Week. But, you know, if people want to get involved with Innovation Week or with ETC in any way, how can they get a hold of you? What are your needs, asks, and wants? Is there anything?
Sure. You can go to our website, etcbaltimore.com. And I am always looking for people that can help my companies. So if you care to be a mentor, if you understand venture capital, as David and Chris do, if you have a specialty that would be right for this, because the startups don't know what they don't know, and they need to talk to people and work with people that'll help them, you know, find the answer. So that's what I'm looking for.
That's terrific. Thank you. Thank you so much, Deb. And thank you, Chris. Thank you so much, David. I'll turn it over to Anthony, who will have some closing remarks, but we really appreciate everything you guys are doing. It's extraordinarily inspirational and excellent. Totally agree with you on promoting Baltimore. It's a jewel on the East Coast. We need to absolutely make sure that everybody knows about it. And we need to all work together and make each other stronger. So thank you guys for participating this morning. Anthony?
Yeah, so I'd also like to add my tremendous thanks to Chris and David and Deb for joining us today. It is very clear there is tremendous excitement and momentum in terms of what's going on in the Baltimore startup ecosystem. And you know, we really appreciate you sharing all of that with us and our audience today. And for everybody, thank you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing everybody on next month's Monthly Blend. Thank you very much.